Good afternoon. Unlike some other members of this panel and this morning's panel, I'm not an expert in biomedicine or embryological development, genetics, or for that matter, anything scientific. Therefore, I will spend most of my time introducing what Buddhist texts say about conception and gestation, with an emphasis on the role of karma in their accounts. Buddhism, which denies a self but accepts rebirth, is concerned with maintaining moral continuity from this life until the next lifetime. So the mechanics of the transition between lifetimes was an important topic for scholastic Buddhist authors during the first half of the first millennium. I hope that what they say can somehow be useful in establishing an ethical Buddhist approach toward synthetic embryos, more accurately described as synthetic embryo models. These are the texts that I've drawn from and the genres to which they belong, including sutras like the Agamas and Gaurabhavakanti Sutra, Abhidharma texts such as Abhidharma Koshabhasha, and early Yogacara treatises like Yogacara Bhumi. Abhidharma Samuccaya is an early Yogacara doctrinal text that at the same time resembles a traditional Abhidharma work. The Asalayana Sutta is one of the oldest sources for the famous statement that three things are necessary for a conception to occur. The mother and father must have sex, the mother must be in a fertile period, and something called a Gandharva, or Gandhabba, must be present. Ashe He Jing, the Chinese translation of another version of the sutra of the same text, says much the same thing. The Mahatanha Sankhya Sutta puts it another way. Even if the mother and father have sex, if the mother isn't in a fertile period and the Gandhabba isn't present, there will be no conception. The version of the same sutta in Ekotarika Agama also phrases it negatively, with a couple of differences. The mother is described as being in a lustful mood, and instead of a Gandhabba, a Gandharva, an external consciousness is mentioned. What was described as a divine entity is here called a kind of consciousness. According to the Buddhist monk and scholar Analayo, the Buddhist idea of Gandhabba comes from the Vedic Gandharva, a deity that was a link between lifetimes. Analayo suggests that in Buddhism it came to refer to the transmigrating being just prior to conception. The term Antarabhava, intermediate being, also came into use. The Chinese translates it as intermediate being or intermediate skandhas. The most important source for Buddhist ideas about embryology is Gaurabhavakanti Sutra, the sutra on entry into the womb. In its longest version, it gives an extended description of conception, a week-by-week account of the 38 weeks of gestation, and lists of the internal worms, demons, and diseases that begin to attack the newborn. It also dispenses religious advice, and throughout it dwells on two themes: the suffering that is experienced by the embryo or fetus at every stage, and the importance of karma throughout the entire rebirth process. The work on the bottom, which is found in the Vinaya of the Mula Sarvastivada school, is the one that I've translated. This sutra, like those shown above, states the conditions necessary for conception. If the mother and father are lustful and come together, if the mother is fit and in her fertile period, and if a Gandharva is present and wishes to enter. It explicitly states that the Gandharva is the equivalent of Antarabhava. The sutra also states that the Antarabhava's appearance, like its rebirth destination, is determined by karma. Furthermore, it states that the length of the mother's fertile period depends on causes and conditions. Women who are happy, have many delights, and eat agreeable food are fertile for a long time, a good thing. Although the sutra doesn't say so explicitly here, a woman's happiness or unhappiness must depend largely on her past karma. The ability or inability to conceive is based on the karma of the parents and the karma of the transmigrating being, which must be consonant with each other. For an explanation of the actual moment of conception, we turn to the famous Oedipal account in Abhidharmakosha Bhashya. The Antarabhava sees the parents having sex. The future male is attracted to the mother and hates the father. The female loves the father and hates the mother. Wishing that it were the one having sex, it enters the mixture of semen and blood. This marks the end of the Antarabhava and the beginning of the new life, which is said to start at this moment. In another version, the Antarabhava doesn't just wish it were the one that was having sex, it believes it. Confused by these thoughts of lust and hatred, it wants the same sex partner to get out of the way, and it thinks it's having sex with the opposite sex partner. This is a detail from a Tibetan medical tanka. The Antarabhava is the little white figure in the upper left descending towards its future parents on what looks like a multicolored streamer. Gaurabhavakranti Sutra delicately admits some of those details and focuses on some mistaken notions of the Antarabhava that are determined by its karma. In the first set of 10 notions, it imagines that it is escaping from various unpleasant things: heat, sun, wind, windy rain, heavy rain with a wind, rain, heavy rain with a wind, cold, a tempest, a gale, very heavy rain, a mass of people. These seem to be listed from least bad to worst. In most cases, the Antarabhava imagines that the place into which it's escaping is one of these determined by karma, listed from most pleasant to least pleasant: a palatial mansion, a penthouse, a throne, a thatched hut, a leaf hut, thick grass, a dense forest, the space between the stones of a wall, the base of a wall. However, the most spiritually advanced being recognizes the true nature of the place where he's going and the reason why he's going there. Due to his own karma, he is entering a hellish hole. A paradox is presented. The mixture of the semen and blood is the purely physical, if there is such a thing, element that constitutes the body of the embryo. However, something else is needed to animate the physical, namely other causes and conditions, including the karma of the transmigrating being, transmitted in the consciousness of the Antarabhava. We shall see how karma also affects development in the womb. This is a picture from a medical illustrations of the embryo in the first week, generally called kalala. In this image, it's simply described as the mixture of semen and blood. Internal winds produced by karma cause developmental changes throughout most of the 38 weeks of gestation. This is a picture of the embryo in the second week. In the picture, it is identified as Arbuda, the usual name for the second stage. In the descriptions of each of the first 4 weeks, the embryo is called the affliction in the womb, and the womb is described in very unpleasant terms. A filthy, putrid, blazing bog. In the case of week 2, karmic winds called all uniting cause the kalala to become an arbuda. It's important to note that the consciousness of the embryo is mentioned. In fact, consciousness was also mentioned in the description of week 1. So consciousness is there when birth happens, when conception happens. The arbuda is described as having the consistency of yogurt or hardened butter. It becomes very uncomfortable in its environment. Most of the descriptions of the next 24 weeks follow a similar pattern. For example, in week 12, winds make the fetus produce the small and large intestines. As in many of the descriptions in the sutra, a colorful simile is made. Just as the fine roots of the small holes of the lotus root are interconnected, the entrails of that fetus are connected. Like tangled yarn, they will adhere to the body. The medical illustration for this week places the production of the intestines and the other internal organs in week 13 instead of week 12. The description of week 27 is different. Here, the sutra explains that the future unattractiveness of a transmigrating being will be due to its past bad karma. It will be stupid and dumb and unpleasant to look at, and unable to walk upright, and hearing impaired, and taste impaired, and with its mouth opening sealed, and crippled in its hand. And it will resemble pretas, and it will not resemble human beings. Even its own relatives will want nothing to do with it. Future attractiveness, on the other hand, will be due to its past good actions. The account of week 38 begins with a description of death in the womb due to the failure of the fetus to turn to the head-first position. This is attributed to the previous bad karma of the transmigrating being. In an account of the removal of the dead fetus, there's an extraordinarily pejorative description of the womb. A dark hole, like a toilet, stinking, filthy, full of worms, etc. The cavity is said to result from the maturation of past karma. Elsewhere in the sutra, failure to turn in the womb is explained by the mother's diet, mental state, health, personality, and how she is treated. Finally, a successful birth is attributed to the past good karma, which is strong enough to overcome even failure to turn. Both Gaurabhavakranti Sutra and Abhidharmakosha Bhashya describe the extraction of the dead fetus. A midwife attaches a fine blade to her finger, inserts her hand into the womb, dismembers the fetus, and removes it. And here's a picture of the finger knife from the Wellcome Institute in London. Abhidharmakosha Bhashya tells us what happens in the case of death in the womb. Rebirth will occur somewhere else, since the transmigrating being must have performed actions that would require retribution in a later life. Okay, sorry. We've seen the importance of karma in Buddhist embryological theory. It's also an essential feature in expositions of the 12-membered formula of conditioned origination, Paticca, which has been mentioned several times earlier today. Two of the members, samskara, number 2, and bhava, number 10, are karma in nature. Samskaras, or karmic existence, karmic forces, refer to the actions of the present life. They determine the destinies of beings, animal, human, divine, etc. Karmic existence refers to the action that directly brings about the future existence in the appropriate destiny. The opening passage of the explanation of conditioned origination in Yogacara Bhumi explains the mechanics of rebirth from the past life to the present. The rebirth consciousness at the moment of conception is equivalent to the last moment of the antarabhava as it enters the semen and blood, or the first moment of the consciousness of the kalala. The last sentence refers to the stages of the embryo and fetus that are explained in detail in Garbhavakanti Sutra. In this slide, a photograph of an embryo at what I can understand to be about the most advanced stage at which embryo models are allowed to develop is juxtaposed with an image of the second week of the embryo according to the Tibetan medical illustration. I will now make some remarks about the possible relevance of traditional Buddhist embryology to the creation of modern embryo models and pose some questions. The source of the constituents is different in the two cases. The Buddhist embryo does not involve an abortion or miscarriage. As I thought until I saw the last slide, the last presentation, in the case of the embryo model, the fact that the source of the stem cells may be an aborted fetus could be a major cause of contention. Evidently, it doesn't have to be have anything to do with an aborted fetus. As we have seen in Buddhism, consciousness is present from conception. According to modern embryology, the brain develops gradually, and the possibility for consciousness comes much later. In the case of Buddhism, development is determined by karma in one case and by physical processes in the other. While in the case of modern medicine, it is directed by genetic code, hormones, and biochemical signals. I learned from ChatGPT. Here are some questions that I have. If the embryo model is a sentient being, is it one from the start, or only from the beginning of the development of the neural system, or only from the more fully developed brain? Is there any point in thinking about a synthetic embryo or embryo model in terms of karmic continuity? The main ethical question seems to be the usual ones: whether the stem cells came from an intentionally aborted fetus, and whether it's permissible to create life for research purposes. What is the relationship between the dead fetus from which the cells may have been taken and the embryo model? In Buddhist terms, would the role be that would there be karmic continuity via an antarabhava between the sentient being that died in the fetus and the embryo model. At the moment, human embryo models are only allowed to develop for about 2 weeks. When one is destroyed, what happens to the sentient being? In Buddhist terms, would preventing it from continuing to develop, if and when that becomes possible, be an act of killing? In Buddhism, existence in samsara is all suffering. However, there's a possibility of liberation from suffering over the course of lifetimes. If the embryo model is a sentient being, remember the first question, is creating a new existence with no possibility of liberation a good thing? After all, the embryo model is destroyed before it has a chance to do anything, including practice for liberation. As long as the embryo from which the fetal stem cells are taken was not intentionally aborted, and if the embryo model is not allowed to develop to a point at which it must be considered to be a sentient being, perhaps there would be no ethical problem. Remember, according to Abhidharmakosha Bhashya, the being that dies in the womb goes somewhere else and is reborn according to the karma. So there would be no disruption of the karmic chain, assuming that only one embryo model is made from a given fetus. And we learned from the first talk today that sometimes more than one embryo model comes from a single source. If more than one